Hello, everybody. Welcome to Raising Multilinguals Live. This is Tetsu Young saying hello to everybody on this third month of the year. Already, who's as shocked as I am? 1/6 of the year is gone. Colleagues?
Wow, yes, it's March already. Thank you, Tetsu. Welcome from me too. I'm Rita Rosenberg from multilingualparenting.com.
Hello, welcome everyone from wherever you're joining us today. My name is Ute Limacher-Riebold from Ute's International Lounge. And we have the pleasure today to have two guests. Let me introduce first Claudia Landini. Claudia Landini became a serial expat in 1989 when she followed her husband abroad for his work for the Red Cross movement. She has lived in Sudan, Angola, Guinea-Bissau, Congo-Brazzaville, Honduras, Peru, Jerusalem, Indonesia, and lives now presently in Geneva. She has raised her two now adult sons in different countries and will tell us more about this in a minute. I'd like to add also that Claudia is the founder of expatkit.com, an international portal that provides support and contacts and information to expat women in all countries of the world. And what expats can do, a project to redefine the role of expats. She's a game-based intercultural trainer and coach and mainly works with expats from all over the world. She speaks Italian, English, French, Spanish, and German.
Thank you, Ute. What a beautiful introduction. I think you said it all.
That's really impressive, Claudia. And I feel we are getting a geography lesson here when we are going through the bios. And I'm so happy to introduce Mariam Ottimofiore. Welcome, Mariam. Mariam is a Pakistani expat author, writer, researcher, and economist. She has lived in so many countries, both as an expat child and as an expat adult. So Bahrain, the United States, Pakistan, the United Kingdom, Germany, Denmark, Singapore, the United Arab Emirates, Ghana, and Portugal. Did I miss anything out?
No, you got it right, Rita. Thank you so much.
And she, according to her own words, her life on the move is messy. I'll come to that later. She currently lives in Lisbon, Portugal, with her German/Italian husband and her German, Pakistani, Italian kids born in Singapore, Dubai, and Lisbon. You have truly made it difficult for yourself, haven't you, Mariam? Passionate about languages, Mariam speaks fluent Urdu, English, Hindi, and German, with some Italian, Danish, and Arabic on the side. She is the author of This Messy Mobile Life, and she has a blog called And Then We Moved Too. Welcome, Mariam.
Thank you so much, Rita. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with yourself and Ute and Claudia and Tetsu. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So today's topic is languages in families on the move. And I would like to ask you, Mariam, the first question. And so can you just tell us a little bit about your family journey how old your children are, so we know, and which countries and languages have you experienced with them?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Rita. I have three children, and before I go into the children, I should just explain a little bit about myself and my husband. We are two native bilingual parents, so we share 4 native languages amongst ourselves: German, Italian, Urdu, and English. And then we have our kids, and are also moving all around the world. So we have 3 children who are, our daughter is 8, almost 9 years old. Our middle son is 6 years old, and the youngest baby is just 6 months old. So we have an 8-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 6-month-old. And we have experienced our home languages, our family languages. Those are the ones that I mentioned: German, Urdu, English, and Italian. And then we have been moving all around the world, as you were mentioning, Rita. So our kids have also experienced the community languages and school languages that they've learned of: Mandarin, Arabic, French, Twi in Ghana, and currently Portuguese.
Wow, that's really impressive.
That's quite.
Claudia, can you also please let us know about your experience?
I don't have such an exciting story as Mariam, language-wise. I'm married to a man from my same hometown, so we are both Italian. And we have 2 sons who are now young adults. So Alessandro is 29 and Mattia is 24. Actually, the choice for us was very easy, because being both Italians, we never even discussed it. We always spoke Italian at home, so my children picked up Italian, and then of course also a little bit of the languages of the countries where they lived. They were both made in Africa but born in Italy. I took Alessandro to Guinea-Bissau when he was 7 months old, and he picked up Portuguese quite well because we spent 2.5 years there. And I took Mattia to Brazzaville when he was 13 days old, but we left when he was 8 months old. So he has no memory of the French language from that period. And then, like Mariam, they picked up the languages of the places where we lived, namely Latin America. We spent 10 years in Latin America, so they were both very fluent in Spanish. And then, French, and I'll tell you probably a bit later about how these languages sort of alternated in their lives.
Yes. So you mentioned now that your sons, Claudia, they learn different languages in the different places that because your sons are adult now. So I'm starting with you. What are the languages that they learned also to read and write? Because we have, of course, the languages that we have at home, and you had Italian, if I understand it right. It was throughout all your stays abroad, it was always Italian. What about the other languages? Which languages did they also learn to read and write?
They always went to the French system. They studied also always in the French system. So the French was the language they learned, obviously, to read, write well. But that was just the language of their studies of school. In fact, most of their lives they spent 10 years in Latin America, 4 years in Honduras, and 6 years in Peru. They were much more in contact with the Hispanic culture. They had some lessons in Spanish at school, but mostly they spoke a lot with their friends in Spanish. And in fact, Spanish has been their main language for many, many, many years. We tried to keep also the proficiency in written and read Italian. So I always tried to teach them a little bit how to write Italian and also encourage them to keep on reading. And I must say that these three languages have been more or less at the same level all throughout their lives, or at least until when they decided the loyalty that they wanted to give to a language rather than the other, and they decided to live in the place and to continue their studies in the place that suited them.
Mm-hmm. So if I understand it right, then your sons, you told me once that they have different languages that they prefer, or different places where they are living. So can you tell us a little bit about that before we ask the same question to Mariam in a moment?
Sure, yeah. Well, yeah, I must say that I've always noticed that the youngest one has always been much more attached to Spanish than the eldest one. I don't know if it depends on the fact that the experience was quite different for them. The eldest one had a more difficult integration. In fact, when we left Peru, they were both speaking absolutely well Spanish, and they were using Spanish to communicate between themselves. But the eldest was very fast in detaching himself from Spanish and sort of shifting his loyalty to French, whereas the youngest one kept Spanish for a much longer time as his favorite language, despite having moved to Jerusalem, where he used both French at school and also English, because he was exposed to more English. I've seen this sort of fluctuating through their lives, and I see now that they have two completely different relationships with the language that they have chosen to become the main language. So one is French for the eldest, who kept on his university studies in France and is now living in Belgium, actually, but he just moved very recently to Belgium. He spent his adult life in France. And the youngest one, who decided to go for English, surprisingly. So really what's been very interesting in this journey for me has been this shifting of loyalties and choice of languages that they autonomously decided to prefer for themselves.
Yes, and I find this view from someone who has adult children. Mine are still teenagers. Well, one is adult now, I have to say, he's 18. But towards the choice of languages, not only what to speak, but also what to read and write more often, and where actually then in the end up in. Yes, you are both Italian-speaking parents coming from the same place, and your children now are in two different countries. So you have 3 countries for your core family. That's very, very interesting. We'll come back to this in a moment. Mariam, you have, of course, this question now related with reading and writing will not apply for your youngest one because he's just born. But can you tell us more about the languages your children speak or prefer speaking, and maybe also reading and writing? How's it going with Portuguese, for example?
It's a great question, Uta. Thank you. Yes, I'll talk about my older two since the baby, I think we can count him out for the time being. But my children, so they are speaking German, English, and Urdu. Those are their 3 main languages. They speak and write all 3. Although Urdu, as you know, Uta, it has a completely different script. It is similar to the Arabic script. So for them to master Urdu has been quite a big endeavor, because we're talking about not just a different language, but a different writing script completely. And, instead of, it starts from the other side, then English. And so there are a lot of differences. What did help was the 4 years we spent in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates, because my daughter started studying and learning how to write in Arabic in school. And because the Arabic alphabet is so similar to the Urdu alphabet, that actually really helped her to get a good ground basis and knowledge of the script and the writing. So she can write, read, and speak it very well. My son, who is a bit younger, who, didn't learn it in school, is definitely struggling more with the writing aspect. Speaking and comprehension, they both have it, but it's more the writing. And of course, he's 6, so he's learning how to write predominantly in English at the moment in school. So we'll see how that develops and that goes on. So, but I would say those are our 3 main family languages that we try to stay consistent in. And we have Italian as a 4th, but because the kids don't see their Italian grandfather every day, we are an expat family living away from, the grandparents. So they understand Italian, Uta. They know all their favorite words like playground and chocolate and, all the things, ice cream, all the things that they, want to know. So they have an understanding of it, but they cannot speak it yet. And I think we've left it for the time being at that level, thinking, okay, they have some understanding and exposure, and perhaps later on they can, study it more.
Okay.
Great. And Claudia spoke a little bit already about the preferences of her children for the languages. So have you noticed? Have you noticed anything amongst your children? Do they prefer one language beyond the other?
Oh, yes, definitely. I think it's so interesting how you as a parent might not be doing anything different from one child to the other, but your children definitely do form preferences. I think it's so interesting. I mean, even when they argue or they play together, their arguments sometimes happen in German and then they make up in Urdu. And it's similar for the parents also, when the parents are arguing, I'll go off in a tirade in Urdu. My husband will be maybe swearing in Italian, but we call it a truce in English. So somehow our languages mirror our emotions, and they become the cues of how we also express ourselves. So our kids definitely have had preferences, and it's interesting. In the beginning, their preference was for the language of the parent that they were the closest to. So for my daughter, that was German, and for my son, it was Urdu. And now I feel it's changing. Now I feel that their preference is also being influenced by what their peers are speaking. So, they definitely communicate amongst each other in English. So I feel like their preferences are constantly changing and have changed.
That's very interesting. It's just so do your children have a language, so they know kind of when mom speaks this language, then you sit up and listen, or are they kind of equal?
Absolutely. I mean, they know that when I'm scolding them in Urdu, like that's when I'm, I really mean business. And for us, it's as a Pakistani, Rita, we are raised multilingually, and we code switch a lot as well. So it could be we speak to our child in Urdu, maybe we read to them or sing to them in English, or maybe we scold them in Punjabi. Right, and the children are really good at picking up those cues. They are really good at seeing when the parents are code switching and how furious or how severely they have to sit down and take notice. So that's definitely been the case in our family as well.
It's really good. Yeah, I'm sure all families have multilingual families have those experiences. It's really fascinating how it can be different between children as well. So when with this many languages, did you discuss with your husband which languages you should maintain, and did your children express preferences with regards to the language choices?
That's an interesting question. I definitely discussed with my husband which languages we should maintain. In fact, this was quite a heated discussion in our family, Rita, because as 2 native bilingual speakers, for my husband, German and Italian, for myself, Urdu and English, we found it a very difficult decision actually to make, because just choosing one language felt like for me, it felt like I was almost denying the other half of who I was, or part of who I was. And I honestly didn't know how to make this decision, because I felt like, as a bilingual parent, the choice of which language to parent your child in, I think it involves also this process of letting go, and realizing that not all your languages perhaps will be your children's languages, also because you're moving and raising them in different corners of the world. So actually, this process was a very emotional and difficult and complex one for us, because, we felt we had to choose. Initially, we decided to do the one parent, one language. And I discussed with my partner, I said, well, I know English they can always learn in school and wherever we live. So, I decided to speak Urdu very consciously, because I knew that, my partner is not Pakistani and we don't live in Pakistan, and the Pakistani grandparents are nowhere near. So if I don't teach them Urdu, where else would they learn it from, right? So for me, that was this was the result of discussing with my husband how should we raise our kids, and for him, he decided that he would be speaking German with our kids, because it's literally it's his mother tongue. His mom is German, dad is Italian, and also because his parents live in Germany. So each time the kids would, our kids would go and see their grandparents, it would be a German-speaking environment, and we thought, okay, then that would be good that they understand what's being said and can, fit in and be part of the culture and all of those things. So we chose very consciously, and we discussed this. We didn't involve the kids in the discussion. It was, just the two of us with some input perhaps from, parents and in-laws. But initially, we didn't really discuss this with the kids. We started off our parenting journey about almost 9 years ago in Singapore and said, all right, well, Papa speaks German, Mama speaks Urdu, and you go to school in English, and you will also learn the community language, which at that point happened to be Mandarin. And we made it clear that the home languages would remain the same, whether we were living in Paris or in Auckland, and that the academic language, as Claudia was mentioning, we also strove for that to remain the same and consistent. And then the only change was the community language that they were exposed to in the new country and through, etc.
Wow. Yes. And Claudia, you mentioned before that you did the same. So you also discussed this, or let's say you said you did not discuss it because it was natural that you would maintain Italian. But when moving to other places, of course, there is this question, especially when the children maybe have this preference for one of the local languages, or maybe for the school language. How was that organized in your family? Did you go with the preference of your children? Did you accept them? Did you have a discussion with them, maybe?
Well, I was fascinated by the fact that Mariam mentioned that they really had to make a conscious decision about what language to speak to their children. This never happened for us, and as I was saying before, for us it was always out of the question. We would speak Italian at home, especially because we knew that the children would never be exposed to Italian in the countries where we lived. So we never really discussed the amount of energy that we would put in the other languages. But we were lucky in a way, because we had the privilege to live in two different countries in the span of 10 years, which in the life of a child is a long time. And they were both speaking Spanish, because we spent 4 years in Honduras and then another 6 years in Peru. So at least they had this continuity of the language. And the structure was very clear. It was Italian at home, it was Spanish in the country with their friends and a little bit at school, and then it was French at school. So I think this helped us, and because they had homeworks both in French and in Spanish, this sort of helped us. It put us in the right conditions, not having to choose. The only thing that we had to choose was up to which point we wanted to go with teaching them written Italian and encouraging them to read in Italian. And in that sense, the two boys were very different, because the eldest one has always been very responsible. Whenever I gave him some, exercises to do in written Italian, he would do them. Even at school, when the other children were playing, he was there, compiling his exercises in Italian. Whereas the youngest one, the first time I sat down with him and I told him, we'll read a little bit in Italian and then maybe I'll teach you to write some words, he made it very clear that he wasn't interested, and he never, ever did it. But if there is something that I can say now at the end of this journey, is that I see many, many mothers also in my community, they worry a lot about the fact that their children do not write properly and they do lots of mistakes. But in fact, what happened with my children was that, I don't know, they once they learned properly the French language and the Spanish language, which of course are very similar to Italian, it was not very difficult for them to avoid the mistakes in Italian and to really become proficient also in written Italian when they became older. And we started to actually use Italian in the chats, when they were far away or when they were teenagers and they were out at night, and we would always, chat in Italian. So it really, the written Italian improved dramatically when we started that.
Yeah, you're mentioning now the teaching our own children, which is not now a question that we have, we can show here underneath. But many parents, like you say, are worried about their children not being able to maybe speak correctly, whatever this means, their language, and then also read and write it. And you mentioned that you took over this task, or you wore or wear, I don't know if you still do, the teacher's hat somehow, to let them, to open them the world of the written word in your home language, which I can imagine was not very easy in all the places that you have lived. Although there are some places, correct me if I'm wrong, the Ministry for Foreign Affairs organizes Italian lessons a little bit around the world. So there is this system, which, for example, for German lessons you don't have, or for Romanian lessons you don't have this around the world, where if you have at least 5 children, they will arrange a class somewhere, depending, of course, where you live. So my question is, how difficult was it for you to maintain this? Or did you have also help from these institutions at some point to maintain Italian? Did they go to a weekend school, for example? And this is now also a question for Mariam, as your oldest ones already can maybe go to such weekend schools in your home languages, plural.
There was no such initiative in the countries where I lived when the children started going to primary school. There was nothing like that in Honduras. And in Peru, there was a big Italian school. So probably the Italian community did not even feel the need to organize these kinds of groups. So actually, I started with the classical system, let's read and write. And for the youngest one, I also had some exercise books. But then, as time went by, I realized that it was not really necessary, and that it would put extra pressure on them, because they were loving the Italian language because we were always speaking in Italian. So there was no doubt about the fact that they would learn to speak well. Actually, they learned to speak Italian very well from a very young age. The question mark remained on their written prowess, but as I said, the youngest one refused to go ahead with that, and then so I then eventually gave up, and I thought they'll find a way to practice and stuff. And what I always insisted on was to read. I read until they were quite old, actually, until they were like 13 or even 14 years old. I read out loud every night with them, and I read always in Italian. So they had their books in Spanish and in French and some in English to read on their own, but with me it was always Italian. So I think that the sum of these things eventually led to them having the tools to develop a very decent written Italian when the moment came.
Yes, absolutely. I find it very important what you just mentioned, that not putting them under even more pressure. I mean, when we have maybe also 3 languages at home plus 2, and the environment changing every 4 years, it is a lot of pressure. And we have to somehow adjust maybe the plans that we had at the beginning to what is possible and what is really possible for our children. And as you said, you have two boys who react in 2 different ways to all this. And I can imagine also Mariam probably is observing this with her children already. I mean, I did when mine were very young. So I think you can spot how your different children will react to certain situations, and also to this pressure or not pressure of the language. You want them to enjoy the language and the culture and everything that comes with it. Mariam, would you like to share about your situation?
Sure. Wow, it's fascinating to hear about your 2 boys, Claudia. I'm learning a lot in this in this session myself. With us, Uta, it was we, you know, yes, you can have Italian lessons in many countries, or even there are German schools in many countries. For instance, there was a German school in Ghana where we were living until last year. We didn't choose to put our children in a German school because simply, you know, they had started off in an international school, and again, we wanted to make sure that their academic language remained English, plus all the other languages on the side. But I think something important to point out is that when you are a globally mobile family, the danger for your children is that they they learn a little bit of so many different languages, but those languages remain underdeveloped. For instance, in our case, if you take Mandarin and Arabic and French and Twi and Portuguese, our kids have learned a little bit of all of them. But for us, it was really important that they have that one consistent academic language that they learn in no matter where they live. So we made a conscious choice not to, put them in a German school or an Italian school. We wanted to make sure that they stay in that international multicultural environment where speaking different languages was the norm, and many other kids were, just kids like them, third culture kids who often spoke one language with their mother and another with their father and a different one with their sibling and a different one at school. And so that's how we did it. I would have loved to have some more support to be able to help my kids to learn Urdu. I definitely have missed this aspect in our globally mobile life. I've had to rely on, blogs and websites and what I can do online. I feel like German, my husband was very consistent in speaking German and is very consistent in speaking German with the kids. So their German is excellent. And for me, I felt, that Urdu, I was really lacking resources. And, there's something I learned, Uta, that, the languages are not equal. So I would get very frustrated seeing how many books there were in German versus how many books there were in Urdu. And even when I would go back to Pakistan, I would say to my parents, please take me to the bookstore where I can get Urdu books for my children to take back to Singapore, take back to Dubai. And they'd say, well, there's barely a market for that here. Very, very little, because we are an English-speaking society when it comes to literacy. And I think for me, this was a big challenge to overcome, realizing I could not compare the progress my kids were making in German with the progress they were making in Urdu, or the lack thereof, or a little bit different how their journeys were, because there is sometimes also a very clear hierarchy of languages. And sometimes I feel that if you take European languages like French and Italian and Spanish and Portuguese. It's a very different ballgame to learning Urdu or Hindi. And, Pakistan and India have had over 200 years of colonization. So we have English, a very, very strong part of our identity. And, if you go, my husband was very surprised that when we went into a restaurant in Karachi, he said, how come the menu is only in English? What if this is Pakistan, so why is the menu not even in Urdu? At least they could make it bilingual, as many places do. And, I'd never thought about it. Because, there are different factors, socioeconomic factors, and also historical factors in how languages develop. So, for people from the subcontinent, this is a very, very interesting and a big thing to sort of bring up that, we don't have enough resources because we don't give the same importance to our own language as many other people do. When we would go to Germany, for instance, everyone would say, oh, of course you're speaking German with your kids. Of course, this is great. And they would applaud my husband. Whereas when I would go back to Pakistan, people would say, why are you bothering with Urdu? You don't even live in Pakistan. Why are you making such a big deal? Why are you insisting that we speak Urdu with your kids? So the lack of community support actually was a big, challenge for me personally in raising multilingual kids, because here I am telling my kids, Urdu is great. When you go back to Pakistan, you can communicate with friends and family. And then when they go back to Pakistan, everyone is speaking English around them and to them. And, one of their cousins even said to my daughter that, Urdu, we only speak Urdu to the help in the house. So it's fascinating how languages can tell you so much about a culture and so much about the place and people's mentality. And I feel like as Pakistanis, we honestly don't really give enough value or importance to our own language. And that's why, there aren't enough resources and all of that then follows. So I really would have, appreciated having, more support and more ways to, bring up their Urdu, but I found that part very challenging. So that's truly the
It's such an important point that you bring up, Mariam, and I'm glad you voiced that.
Yeah, in fact, we have comments from the audience, from Heather. Let me put this up. Heather says, wow, I relate to that. Polish people sometimes applaud us, but often we get asked why we bother. So, I mean, it's
yes,
a problem that people see.
Yeah, we have also a language that is, politically different than the Urdu, with the Swiss German. Also there, you don't find much resources, and people asking us abroad, why would you maintain Swiss German? You only speak it in this very little part of this very little country. So I can pretty much relate on this, although I cannot compare because the situation with Urdu is different politically and sociologically and everything from the Swiss German. But I think it's very important to point out that for families like yours or like mine or like others who have a minority and minoritized language across the world, that it is not a reason to drop that language. And I really applaud you that you keep it up, that you keep up with Urdu, because like others said, a little bit is always more than nothing, and it's always worth it. So even if they can only speak with someone else in your language, it's always more than others do. So it's an amazing job that you're doing.
So let's take. We have a lot of questions and comments here. Let's. You both spoke about teaching your children to or participating in the literacy and learning to read and write. And we have a question from Paola Piccino that she sent in, and she says that our kids need to learn and write in English at school, but we only want to speak Dutch and Italian at home. How would they support the English literacy learning? Do you have any comments on that? Or did you?
I have. Shall I go?
Yes.
I think the only way you can support your children in this process is to not to put any, to make them feel that the language that they use at school is welcome at home, in any way that is suitable to your family routine. I think it's perfectly okay if you keep on speaking Dutch and Italian at home. But in my experience, the children need to feel that there is a space, because that language that they learn at school, which has no connection to the language that they speak at home, is still a very important part of their lives. They spend most of their time at school, and they develop relationships outside of the family in that other language. So I don't think it's necessary really that you sit down with them and you help them doing homework, although that, if possible, they would maybe at times also be interesting. But I think the most important thing is that you make them feel that the language that they use most of the time outside of the family is appreciated, and find somehow a space within the family. Mm-hmm. And I cannot tell you how, because every family has got its routines. So you probably find your own way in that.
Absolutely. We have another question from Chiara Seminario. Hi, I'm Chiara. How did you manage as a parent-child these changes with the different languages? Did you know all the languages your children studied? This is something that many parents who I work with are asking as well. Do I need to learn all the languages that my children are learning at school or wherever you live? Maybe Mariam?
Yeah, sure. I'm just reflecting and thinking as to how our experience has been. I think trying to learn every language that your child is studying, it's a pretty tall order. I mean, I know I didn't have as much success with Mandarin as my daughter did at her age, because it's such a tonal language that she got the tone right from birth, and I struggled so hard just to get the right tone, to say the right thing. So I think it's a tall order as a parent. But I think I would agree with what Claudia was just saying, that you have to be involved with the children's academic language, and it does deserve a special place in your language makeup and in your family as well. And it needs to be acknowledged that this is how you spend maybe majority of your day, depending on how many hours the child goes to school. I mean, I think currently with COVID and lockdown, a lot of parents are struggling because they're trying to homeschool their child in a language that's not their own, and perhaps they don't speak it as well. I have a lot of friends in Germany who are struggling with, helping their child do homework in German or in Danish in Copenhagen, and I think it's a big struggle. But how to manage that is, we are quite clear. We help and support our child and their languages any which way we can. Currently, for instance, they are also learning Portuguese, and we are also learning Portuguese. The parents are also learning Portuguese. So sometimes the four of us will sit and say, well, what did you learn today in Portuguese? Because we want to normalize this experience of living multilingually, and we want to show our children that we are also learning the new language, and sometimes we can share our observations or challenges or observations about what's good, what's not. And so I think being partners in the journey and sharing is actually helps to make it fun as well for the kids. So I think that's how I would suggest that parents get involved.
I like it very much that you emphasize the fun in all this, welcoming all the languages, etc. There is another question that is from Marta Pacheco. How long did they keep? I imagine it's referred to the children. How long did they keep the language of the country? I often feel that it could be a waste of time for my child to introduce another language for just a few years. What do you think? Maybe you can say, you can answer first, Mariam, and then also Claudia, please.
Sure, that's a great question, Marta. I always feel that learning no language is a waste. I feel it's a great, incredible privilege and an opportunity. And I also feel that languages are maybe the only gift in this expat world or globally mobile world that we actually sometimes get to keep. Nobody can take that away from us. You might have to move countries, you might be living somewhere else, but if you can still speak or understand the language of that country, you will always have that emotional bond. I know still respond to Danish after 4 years of living in Copenhagen. For me, it's familiarity. That's what Danish is to me. In the beginning, it sounded awful, guttural sounds, but now, it's familiarity, and it's a place that reminds me of home. But keeping up with the language of each country, I think as a parent, my best advice would be to be very intentional. What do you want to keep? What can you realistically keep? And how much time and effort can you spend? How much support will you have? I think all of those questions you should be asking yourself. Because maybe you decide it is worth it, and maybe you want your child to continue in that language no matter where you move to next. It could be that's the case for you. For us, for instance, we unfortunately decided that Mandarin was something very difficult for us to keep on going, but Arabic was different. Arabic is something, because it ties in so closely to our one of our family languages of Urdu. We saw the benefit of continuing it, and we saw the benefit of helping our kids with their overall language goals. So we did keep that. Twi was fun to learn, but we knew that once we left Ghana, that was not going to be something we continued. And, now here we are in Lisbon, and we're all learning Portuguese. And, Portuguese, probably Uta or Rita can correct me. How many speakers of Portuguese are there around the world? There are millions and millions of Portuguese speakers. So I think it's a really amazing opportunity, and we'll see. We don't stress out too much about our languages. We divided them into the need to have, which are our family languages, and then the nice to have and the nice to learn. And so we try to make it fun and also not put too much pressure, as Uta was saying, on the children.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And Claudia, what is your take on this?
Yes, I tend to agree completely with Mariam. I also think it's never really a waste of time. And even if the child spends a short period of time in a country, it's always good if he or she can pick up a bit of that language, because that's basic to communicate outside of the family, and that gives a completely different perspective to the child. I always, thinking that I put my child when he was 3 years old, just turned 3. And Mattia, the little one, he only spoke Italian at that time. And I put him in a school where someone was speaking to him in French and the other person was speaking to him in Spanish. I always think the first days must have been absolutely terrible for him. For a little child far from the family, not being able to understand and to be understood must be a terrible, terrible sensation. So if there is a possibility for a child to pick up even a language at a basic or at the beginner level, and then knowing that the child will forget the language, I would still go for it, because even if it's for a short period, it will give the child some tools to be understood, to understand, and to participate in the routine in a different way. And then, how long they keep the languages, it depends on their age, because Alessandro picked up Portuguese. He spoke very nicely Portuguese when he picked Guinea-Bissau, and he forgot it within 6 months, it was gone already. But when they left Latin America, Mattia was 13, and he speaks absolutely fantastic Spanish. So it depends on the age, but they will forget the language. But I think, I'm not a linguist, but I think that somehow, somewhere, the richness and the challenge and the flexibility that learning a language gives remains. Yes. And it's incredible. But my eldest is learning lots of languages now. He learned a little bit of Chinese, and then he went to Portuguese, and now he's learning German. And I can see that there is this tension in him, and I believe that he's got a sort of familiarity with the process of learning a language. It doesn't scare him to launch himself into new linguistic adventures, because I think that comes really from having been exposed and having learned so many languages. So I think it's useful in a way, one way or the other.
Yes, absolutely. It's useful, and it's something that stays for life. Like you said, even if your son, or even if we do not need the language or one of our languages at some point, it will still stay with us, and we can reactivate it or improve our skills at any moment. Yes.
Mariam, you had a comment.
Oh, I just wanted to make a very quick comment that Claudia and I have talked a lot about linguistic empathy and helping our children learn linguistic empathy, which means that, they understand that different kids speak different languages. And coming back to your question, Marta, I think that, as Claudia was mentioning, even if your child learns that language and you stay in that country for 2 or 3 or 4 years, it's important that they are able to feel that sense of, being able to communicate with the wider community. And for globally mobile children, that's a very crucial skill. Not to raise them in a bubble, but to be able to have them or give them the chance to make those kinds of connections with the community. And you never know, maybe the connections are so strong that your child wants to continue that language, because he or she feels an emotional bond to it. I think languages are it's a very emotional process as well, what we decide to keep and what becomes a part of us. And so I would say that it's never, a bad idea to learn a new language. And I feel it truly helps kids build in that linguistic empathy with other children. Because once you learn a new language, you know what it feels like to start from scratch. And that's a great skill for children who are living in a global world.
Great point, Mariam.
We have one more question from the audience, from Martukis Kis. Thank you for loving our sessions. So probably moving in a couple of years to an English-speaking country. And the question is whether it's better to introduce written Spanish before English, as the writing is like a translation of the sounds. The thing is, the approach Matukis has learned is syllabic in Spanish, and in English it doesn't work the same way. You have any? It's a very specific question about those two languages. Do you have any comments on that?
I think it's quite a tricky question. First of all, we don't know how old the children are. I imagine if he says he wants to introduce Spanish before English or English before Spanish, they are preschool age. But it pretty much depends, and we had this in other sessions, right? It pretty much depends also on the readiness of the child. Is the child interested in reading and writing that language? Also, what kind of school will the child go to? Is it going to be an English-speaking school, like you mentioned, or will your child also have the opportunity to get educated in Spanish? So it is something that you can decide yourself if your child is actually already interested in Spanish, for example, or go with the school. So, and many parents choose to first let the school and the teachers introduce the reading and writing, because reading and writing are skills that are not naturally coming to us like speaking and understanding. They need formal instruction. Children need to be have a certain maturity and understanding of the fact that these signs that are on the paper have a meaning, and if you put them together, they have another meaning in the word and in sentence, etc. So it pretty much depends on all these factors that I just mentioned.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Ute. So we have another question, because you've been doing this moving around for quite a while now. So with the benefit of hindsight, after all the move that you've made, anything you would do differently when it comes to the children's language learning and maintaining language choices? Claudia?
You know, whenever I'm asked this question, I search and search, and I cannot really find anything that I would do differently. I'm happy. I'm happy with the way we have related to the different languages. I have never felt that my children were uneasy with the languages. They had a good relationship with three of them, and no, I would maybe I would stress even more the tools that I have used that have been, as I was saying, reading a lot, but also talking a lot. I'm quite a talkative person. I have two very talkative boys, and my tendency was always to talk a lot to them. And I just didn't do it for linguistic reasons. I did it because I think it is important to speak with the children. And if there is a suggestion that I could give to all the parents that raise multilinguals, is to, yeah, sure, concentrate on the language. That's absolutely important. It's the channel we have to communicate in the immediacy, but also teach your children to love communicating, teach your children to love speaking, to love telling about their days, about their friends, and to love listening to you. You know, you were mentioning with the Expat Click, the community that I created in 2004. So my children participated in the adventure. Every day I went to fetch them at school, and it was the turn of one of them to start telling how their day was, and then it was the other one, and then it was my turn, and I told them a lot of things about Expat Click. They feel it's right that they have contributed to the development of the project as much as I have. So no, personally I'm happy. I'm happy with the fact that we have always maintained Italian, have always read in Italian. I'm happy not having pushed them to, for instance, to learn English, because they were speaking three languages. And, you know, you made me think of this, Mariam, when you mentioned the fact that there are some languages that are definitely privileged, and English is one of these. The supremacy of English is everywhere. And my children didn't have English at all, because they grew up in a Latin environment, in an Italian family, and in a French culture at school. They were learning a little bit of English in the French school, but it was not really scholastic English. It was not really, they were not really motivated. And we wondered at times with my husband, should we do something to teach them English? Maybe, you know, later on they will need it. But then we decided, no, I mean, English has no space in their lives at the moment. They will learn it. And actually they did. And the youngest one went to study university in English. And now English is his first language. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you, Claudia. Your reflections on this topic, Mariam?
I'm glad that Claudia's answer is so different from mine. I think with the benefit of hindsight, Rita, there is I would do a couple of things differently. The first, as I mentioned, was that you know, I chose, and my husband and I, we chose to do the one person, one language model. And we strictly did OPOL for the first 4 years of our parenting. And, you know, it was, you know, the model was working. We were each speaking our native languages, but I realized I personally was miserable. And the reason I was miserable was because I was constantly denying my other half, my English half, my brain that thought in English. And even when I went to school in Pakistan, I studied in English. You know, so if you ask me today to do math or explain to you, you know, anything about solar system or talk about World War II, I will do that in English, even though I'm fluent in Urdu. But for me, it was a very constant battle. I chose Urdu because of the emotional connection, and yet suppressing English felt wrong to me. And so one thing I would do differently is perhaps acknowledge that as a native bilingual speaker of the two languages, it felt unnatural to suppress my own multilingualism in order to enhance my children's multilingualism. And, I think now what I would do differently is to show them how to be multilingual in a more, relaxed way, perhaps, not in such a structured or such a rigid way. I feel like the one person, one language model could work very well and does work very well for many, many families. But for us, with each parent having two languages, I felt it was too rigid. And, I felt that we were being too harsh on ourselves, saying, forget Italian, only German, forget English, only Urdu. And I felt for each of us, it created this loss, Our last name is Italian, our family is very, very Italian in terms of food and, so many other customs and culture. And, we felt that loss, that we're not able to, express that in our family. So, almost 9 years into this journey, I feel like I would do things a bit differently now in terms of my children's language and maintaining their languages by showing them what it means to be multilingual, what it means to be code switching, what it means to understand the context of where you are and who you're speaking with, and showing them this is what it means to be multilingual, and being perhaps a bit more, open and also perhaps reading to them in both my languages, not just one of my languages. I, now have given myself permission to not just read in Urdu, but also read in English. Because you'll probably be surprised to hear, Rita, my parents never read to me in Urdu, not even one book. I only read English books when I was growing up. And so even for me to read Urdu books was a pretty big thing, but now I can actually read some of my favorites to them as well. So I feel that that's something I would do a little bit differently. And my husband still speaks German with the kids, but he does allow himself to sing in Italian. If we're doing a big road trip, he will sing in Italian, all the lullabies that he grew up, singing and learning, and sort of passing that on, that family, favorite songs and all of that to our kids. So I think we've allowed ourselves to be a bit more flexible, and we've allowed ourselves to express ourselves in the truest form that stays true to us, and sort of show them by example that, languages are an amazing way to connect, and you don't need to just, have a very rigid framework. You can speak all these different languages, enjoy them, and build relationships in them. So that would be one thing I would do a little bit differently, not be so strict on myself, and allow myself to express the whole spectrum of multilingualism, model that for my kids.
Absolutely, yes. It is what you just mentioned, Mariam, is in effect something that many parents who are multilingual themselves struggle with the most, which language to give the priority, and not wanting to give the priority to only one, but maybe two or three. And this is absolutely possible, and I would like to send this message also out to you. You can introduce the other language at any time, by using also the time and place strategy. And now that you have Miro, the little Miro might grow up with Mama speaking two languages, who knows? This is also an aspect that we didn't touch much this evening, with using different languages with the children depending on where you live at the moment that they are born. Right, the history of languages of your eldest, Mariam, is not the same as the one of your middle child and your youngest. So their language composition in their life will be anyways different, although they are siblings and they are all part of one family, which makes it for me very, very fascinating. But it can also be a bit daunting or challenging for some other families who say this is just too much. But yes, do we have another question from the audience?
There is one more question. Can we are over the hour, but let's take this last question still. It is difficult to choose. And did you do a lot of mixing and relationship can feel stripped of its essence if we stick to one language. So do you have some tips for Jelena on what you just said? Or would you have Mariam then gone for more code switching, or what do you have you thought about that? I know.
I think Helena's question is really fascinating. It also depends on the parents and whether they can understand each other's language or which language are they communicating in. I should point out that my husband and I both made the effort to learn each other's languages. So he took Urdu classes for a year, and I studied German. And we felt we knew enough about each other's languages to then understand what the other one was saying in that language to our kids. That's one thing. The other thing is she's saying that she's planning on doing OPOL with their baby, but not sure whether to go for just one between each other when in front of her. And this really depends on you, Helena, and your partner, because it depends what you speak already. It can be very difficult to speak. You get very used to speaking certain language with certain people, and then it can be quite difficult to change that. My husband and I met in London, for instance, so we started speaking English with each other, and when we learned each other's languages, we would introduce some German and some Urdu. But, our communication stayed in English predominantly. So, code switching is something I feel you can introduce even at a later point, which is what we did. So it truly depends. It truly does depend on you. If you are struggling, like I did, with just choosing one language, perhaps you then choose both your languages. And as Uta was mentioning, there is a time and place method. There are many different models that then you would look into to support that strategy and that goal.
Yes.
But
I think the important thing here is to know what you want and then be aware of how much exposure a child gets to each language. So it's not a given that a child will pick up and start speaking a language just because a parent speaks it nowadays. There needs to be enough interactive exposure to it. So it's important to kind of think about what parents want, which languages they want the child to grow up with, and where does that language have a space in the family life, and are there enough speakers of it so the child can pick up those languages?
Yes, I would just like to add something about the code mixing. I know that when you have several languages with your partner, and then you ask yourself, what is going to happen when I have a child? Will the child be picking up then this mixed language? And in fact, this is one thing where parents should be very much aware of. If they are mixing continuously all the languages, how can the child then understand that they are actually using 2-3 languages at a time? So it is something that new parents should be aware of, that please, for the sake of the child, in order to understand what parts of what you're saying belong to one language and what parts belong to the others, not to code switch the whole time or not to code mix, which is different. That's when you mix the language in the same sentence. Switching is when you go from one person to the other and you speak Urdu with mama and German with papa. But if you, as parents, mix continuously, this is one thing to be aware of, to try to avoid it when you are with a child, yes, and to maintain or to pass on one language each. If you have two, at some point you can introduce also the other languages, but don't mix them all from the beginning. It will be just a huge confusion for the child. You don't confuse the child with the languages, but the child needs to understand what parts of what you're saying belong to what language in order to become fluent in it. So, Rita.
Yes, we have, I think we've come to the end of the questions we had planned. Do we have further questions from the audience? I don't think that if we do, then we will pick those up in the comments. So Claudia and Mariam, do you have any words of wisdom that you would like to share with our audience? Something, I know you are both wise women and you have so much to say, but can you keep it fairly short and give our audience some kind of grandiosa golden advice? Claudia.
I'll go first because I'm sure that Mariam will have wonderful things to say. No, I mean, the only thing I would say is just trust your children. I think we parents, we put a lot of pressures on ourselves because we are afraid to force our children too much into a situation that is very difficult for them. But most of the time, from my experience, from what I'm seeing from my children and also from you know the whole of the community I grew up with, really many of the times the worry is in the parents' head. The children know how to manage. Deep inside, they know how to manage things and languages, and I think the best gift we can give them alongside exposing them to many languages and accompanying them in this path is to trust them and to relieve a little bit the fear that they will not do it and they will suffer from terrible pressure if we expose them to more than one language at the time. If we trust them, I think they will feel it, and they will be more confident in managing, in finding their own personal way to manage the languages, even if they are very small.
And Mariam.
I love your piece of advice, Claudia. It's a great one. I'll just say that my advice would be the most important thing is to create a need for your child to speak that language. So to make sure that you are making that connection clear. And I would also say that be prepared for some setbacks or rebellions or some questioning. I know when my daughter turned 3, he figured out, wait a minute, Papa speaks English, Mama speaks English, so why do I need to speak German with you and Urdu with you? It's a very natural part of the process. So that's not anything bad, and it's great, thing that you go through with your child. So be prepared for that there will be those moments. And I think the last thing I would say to parents is that, multilingual parenting is not a competitive sport. And so don't make it out to be a competitive sport, This is not something you're doing to make sure your kids grow up as Einsteins or, it's not something to be competitive about with other people or other family. I think empathy is a very important part of this process. And I think that for many of us who live our lives in different cultures and languages, it's simply, how we do it. And languages, are just part and parcel of our globally mobile life. And it's not about, being competitive, and it's not about driving your kids too hard. It's truly about enjoying the gift of language and make sure you keep that in perspective and don't forget that. So
absolutely, and to give yourself a pat on the back for doing a good job.
Yes, yes, celebrate every little milestone. I love to tell the story, Rita, that we were on a flight once from Dubai to Karachi, and on an Emirates flight, and they made the in-flight announcement in Arabic, English, and Urdu. And my daughter, was watching cartoons. She had the headphones on already, and she said to me, "Why did the air hostess just repeat the same thing 3 times?" Very, very annoyed, and put her headphones back on. And I was left to just ponder that, wow, she didn't realize there were 2 different languages, that the safety instructions were being repeated interested in. And for me, it's those moments where, you know, you really realize that your child's view on the world is so different, and they're truly very lucky to be able to have access to so many different languages. So enjoy that, rejoice in it, and make the most of it.
What a lovely anecdote to finish on. Thank you very much, Mariam.
Well, thank you very much, Mariam and Claudia. And I know we kind of had finished, but I do see a question from Heather that we kind of skipped over, and it's something that I'm also interested in. If it's okay, either we sort of take it here, or we can ask our guests to answer in the chat. Can we take 1 minute and just do this one?
Yeah, because you're asking so nicely, Tetsu. Let's do it.
Yeah, but you know, my father says he says, you know, you're 5 minutes late or 10 minutes late, it's the same thing. You're late to the meeting anyway. No, so Heather asks. Let me go get the original question. It's a little higher in the. Here you go. Okay, so did either of you try to prepare your children linguistically before moving to another country? You know, giving them exposure to the new country before arriving. And I would also add, not just linguistically, maybe, you know, psychologically, you know, the psychological mental preparations. What are the things that you do to prepare your kids before the move? Because it is a big experience, right?
I'm thinking. Definitely not linguistically. The big move was from Europe to, from Africa to Latin America, and we were going to face a completely different new language. No, we did not prepare them linguistically. Again, for a little bit the thing that I said all through the interview, language is something they relate to in a very lively way, something live. I didn't see the meaning in sort of talking to them in Spanish. Even, well, I didn't even know Spanish at that time, but you know, exposing them. So I thought, and I think we were right. Let's just start the adventure when we are there, and they will feel really the need and the excitement of speaking the language that surrounds them. Well, psychologically is another matter. Yeah, that depends a lot on the age of the child, on what the child leaves behind, on what we are going to face. Again, I don't know, Mariam, you will relate your experience. You took them also around the world quite a lot. I don't remember doing a particular preparation in this sense. The thing that I was always that I always tried to do was to insist on the reason behind having to leave the country that they loved, because all children love their country and their routine and their homes and their friends, and stressing the why we were moving, and trying to infuse them with a bit of enthusiasm about the adventure to come. That would, I think, looking back, I think that was the preparation that I gave them. When we moved to Jerusalem, my eldest had already gone to France, and the youngest was 13 years old, and we didn't have a mission right after Peru, so we spent some months, like maybe 4 or 5 months in Italy, and he was hating it, and he couldn't wait to leave, because living in a different country than Italy was his dimension. So in that case, I really didn't have to do any kind of preparation. As soon as we had our ticket, he was ready with his suitcases, let's go. But you know, as I say, it depends really a lot on the different situations that the children leave behind and face. The thing that I would say, always communicate your enthusiasm and the motivation that brings you forward into the next adventure.
Mariam, do you have a nugget?
I would agree with Claudia. I don't think we prepared our children linguistically before moving to any country. We obviously told them we're moving to this country, this is the language they speak there, but we didn't start learning that language or introduce them to any books or cartoons or anything of the sort. For instance, now we moved to Portugal about 6 months ago, but we didn't introduce them to Portuguese until we arrived here. As Claudia was mentioning, for third culture kids, we follow the raft model, which I'm sure Uta will be happy to explain more about and give you more information. The raft is to manage that move and to manage the move psychologically and prepare the children for all the different aspects. But if you ask specifically about giving them exposure to the new language before arriving, no. But I should also qualify and say that we always knew that our kids would be going to an international school. So I think that was also a reason for not introducing the language beforehand. For instance, had I moved to Portugal, or was I moving to Portugal and putting my children in a public Portuguese school, then maybe I would have decided to give them some exposure beforehand. But because I knew that they would remain in an international environment, I didn't stress out about that. I think it's important not to stress out your children too much. My children are especially quite young. They're all three are under 10. So, you want to keep them excited, as Claudia was mentioning, and help them to process the transition. And I think that's quite important for the pre-departure stage. So that's at least what we have done in our experience.
Well, thank you very, very much. Ending this on a positive note, as you say, we try to help the kids with a positive attitude. It's always a bright tomorrow. So thank you again, Mariam and Claudia, for this wonderful jam-packed session. I don't know, this could be our longest one so far, but we just have so many questions, and we were not able to get to all of them. So we do want to apologize to everybody who is watching right now. I specifically see, I think Chiara had more questions, but we'll try to get to them after the live session. We'll get into there and answer your questions as much as possible. So thank you. And anybody watching, please, even if you're watching the recording, if you can access the link that's scrolling right down below us right now to give us some feedback to make this an even better show for you guys. We do appreciate the enthusiasm that you have and showing up every week or every other week to come cheer us up. So what's coming up next time? Let me put it up on the screen.
Yes, on Tuesday, the 16th of March, we will have Dr. Francesca Lamorgia and Dr. Sharon Unsworth as our guests, and they will talk about their podcasts, Mother Tongues and Kletsheads. They're both linguists and researchers, one in Ireland, the other one in the Netherlands, and both raise their children multilingually. If you would like to know more about their podcasts, what made them start their podcasts, and what topics they cover, please come and join us on Tuesday, the 16th of March at 1 p.m. New York, 6 p.m. London, and 7 p.m. Paris time at Raising Multilinguals Live, either on Facebook or YouTube.
Thank you, Uta. Once again, thank you to our fabulous guests, and thank you to everybody who's been watching us this past hour and almost a half. So we will see you in 2 weeks, March 16th. Main post. So we'll talk to you then. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.